I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Luis Vieira. I'm the coordinator of the London-based Bretton Woods project. And I wanted to begin by thanking those who helped us organize this event. I won't name them, but there are several co-sponsors, so thank you very much. I'd like to begin by doing a bit of scene setting and trying to outline why it is that we as the Bretton Woods Project and others who organize this event thought this would be an important and timely discussion to have. I'll be brief, but according to WFP, the World Food Program, global food insecurity remains higher than pre-pandemic levels, with an increase of 160 million people compared to early 2020. Up to 309 million people are facing acute levels of insecurity in 2024 in 72 countries, so it's a very generalized situation. The UN's 2023 State of Food Security and Nutrition in World 23 report stresses that up to 780 million people do not have enough to eat. This is an amazing statistic. More than 3 billion can't afford a healthy diet. And by 2030, it's projected that more than 600 million people will still be living in hunger. So in addition to generating food insecurity, higher food prices have also contributed, as we all know, I think, to the global cost of living crisis that has also affected people in the global north, and particularly the most vulnerable, particularly women. You know, the World Bank, as we'll hear, has recognized the severity of the problem and has identified food and nutrition as one of its 8 global challenge programs. I'm sure you've been hearing about these programs. And maybe Gita can speak a bit more now when she has the floor. The World Bank has identified several factors that contribute to the lack of progress in meeting SDG 2, which is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and to promote sustainable agriculture. The various World Bank documents on agriculture, etc., detail its understanding of the short and long-term consequences of causes of food insecurity, including the El Nino climate pattern, climate change, the war in Ukraine, the economic impact of COVID-19, restrictive food trade policies, high debt levels, and lack of productivity improvements in agriculture. And I'm sure, as Gito explained, those are indeed, and we don't question the validity of those causal arguments. But I think, as the title of this panel suggests, we think that there's a missing element in the analytical framework that the bank and others are using. The Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food in 2024 noted that, I'm quoting, global food systems are categorized by extractivism, which can be understood as a non-reciprocal dominance-based relationship. He stressed that smallholder farmers produce 70% of the world's food, and yet they face hunger. So this is a very, very important and catastrophic situation. The Special Rapporteur also notes that, quote, corporations enjoy a profound degree of power, but are not held accountable for the harm that they cause to human health and the environment. For example, ABCD, a grain trading giants, Archer, Daniels Midland, Bunge, Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus Company account for between 70 and 90% of global grain trade. 4 agrochemical companies control 60% of the global seed market and 75% of global pesticides markets. This high concentration of corporate power allows a relatively small group of people to shape markets and innovation in a way that serves the ultimate goal of shareholder profit maximization and not the public good. And this, again, I'm quoting the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. I wasn't making that up as I sit here, just to be clear. In October 2021, a group of 12 UN independent experts on human rights and special rapporteurs launched a statement warning of the threat posed by financial speculation to the enjoyment of a range of human rights, including food. So again, just to highlight, hopefully that helps to set the scene a bit of the discussion. Within that context, we would like to explore the impact of the phenomenon not mentioned, as I highlighted, by the World Bank, as it has tried to explain and highlight the issues related to food security and nutrition. And that is financialization of the global economy and agriculture in particular. So I've spoken enough. You've heard enough of me, but I just wanted to say that we're very fortunate to have a great panel to explore the impacts of financialization in agriculture and its gendered impacts. And they are Cássio Boechat, Professor of Economic and Rural Geography at the Federal University of Espírito Santo in Brazil. Gita Sethi, Global Lead for Food Systems at the World Bank. Jane Nalunga, to my left, Executive Director of Siatini in Uganda. Grace Namungambe, Economic Justice and Rights Officer at FemNet, who is joining us online. So the way this will work is that each panelist will make an introductory remark of maybe 5 to 7 minutes. And then the idea is, rather than have long presentations, I'm going to try to facilitate a discussion between them. And then we'll leave the last half hour or so and open the floor for questions. And again, the idea is to really have an open, honest, engaging dialogue. As I was mentioning to Gita, this is by no means the end of a discussion. It's an opportunity to begin what we hope will be an engaging and more prolonged discussion on what we think is a very, very important topic. So I would like to begin by giving Cássio the floor to make his statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank Luis Vieira and the Bretton Woods Project for this invitation to be here to exchange a little bit with the members of the panel and people who are there. I'm a professor of geography here in Brazil, and I've been researching the modernization of agriculture in Brazil and the recent process of financialization of agriculture and the land market and its impact. I'll summarize here a few research achievements for you. Luis asked me to define briefly financialization, talk about the impacts of it on the dynamics of agriculture in Brazil, and it's quite a challenge to do in the given time. So let's try. And I asked to share here my screen. Okay. To guide me a little bit. I hope you can see that. Okay. All right. Well then, to talk about the process of financialization, which is usually conceived as the recent dominance of finance or of the financial markets over the economies, we should begin by thinking in its primary foundation or its basis, that is interest. Interest is the price of money, the price of loaning a certain amount of money to a third part. Modern money tends to be centralized in the bank system, which transforms it into credit. Part of such credit is loaned to companies as investments, which contract debt. Banks tend to loan more money to companies that seem to be more capable of paying their interests. Interest-bearing capital.
Cássio, sorry to interrupt, but just to let you know that the slides are not moving through. I don't know if you had an intention of going through them. They're just... Thanks.
Okay, I did. Okay. Interest-bearing capital presents, however, new forms in dividends paid to the owners of assets, such as bonds, shares, heritages, equities, and derivatives. These owners of assets appear as shareholders or investors and claim for dividends to invest their capital. While loaned, they become owners of others' debts. The possibilities of money becoming more money thus autonomizes themselves from the circuits of labor exploitation in real production of commodities into circuits of indebtedness and circuits of financial products, assets, negotiated in the secondary financial markets and in the stock markets. The prices of such assets variate in accordance of a wide range of factors, not only those related to the concrete production of commodities. The promises of capital valorization are then unfolded in a very complex engineering of rights on titles, which represent the property over the revenues, incomes, or the patrimony of families, corporations, and states. Those promises of future productions and valuations are priced in the present within the stock and future markets. The inflation of financial assets, these property rights over future capital income, has altered expectations about the pace of enrichment since the early 80s, accelerating it while at the same time changing the very qualitative perception of wealth, which has come to include these assets in the typical properties of middle-income families and the management of companies, so that economic decisions in general have become conditioned by the prevailing interest rate. In this way, the interest rate becomes the expression of expected prices changes and therefore of the liquidity of financial assets. The development of financial innovations and the computerization of the market has lifted the volume of transactions with ever shorter terms, which combined with leverage based on bank credits explain the enormous potentials for feedback from price increase process bubbles, as well as the risk of a collapse in the case of a sharp fall movement. Thus, a very broad critical context of capitalist social reproduction has been developing since the 1970s in the world economy, and within it, also in Brazil, and in the modernization of its agriculture, producing in its unfolding some aspects that are equally critical from a social, economic, and environmental point of view. Here we can see some of these expressions in the ever-growing size of financial prices and stocks in comparison.
Sorry, Cassio, we still can't see. The only slide we see is your first slide.
I can't believe it.
Sorry.
I did change, but I don't know what happened. I'll try it again.
I'm told that you need to share your screen.
Yes.
No, it's okay. Okay, there you go. Success. Thank you.
Okay. So we have here these expressions of an autonomization of the financial price markets and the assets in regard to the GDP, which have become an expression of what I had said. So finance capital is in search for options, opportunities, and agribusiness companies are in search for renewing their debts, and new mechanisms of financialization of agriculture have evolved since the 1990s in Brazil and also in other parts of the world. And the territorial expansion of capital led by that seems to be a means of crisis mitigation in the financial markets, to the financial markets. I cannot go further. There's some problem with the slides here. I'll try it again. Can you see that? No.
It's okay. Maybe you can talk us through them.
Okay.
And also, I think you don't have very much time left, I'm afraid. So.
Okay, then. I can stop it here, and we can discuss the impacts of it later if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. And if you can maybe, as you begin the discussion, maybe highlight more, how you view these. You began to do this, the link between the finance interest and the actual price of food and the food security crisis and et cetera. That'd be great. Thank you very much. So I would like to then give the floor to Gita to make your opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Luis, and thank you, friends, for being here. It's really a great pleasure and an honor to be here. What I thought may be very useful is to give you a glimpse of how we at the World Bank are thinking about our food systems and the way we are financing it in particular. Let me start with a very bold statement. Our food systems are not fit for purpose. And already Luis alluded to the statistics. Every second person on this planet is either hungry, undernourished, malnutrition, or suffering or over calories, and therefore other kinds of health impacts. And the same system is then creating a bankrupt planet. Food systems is the biggest cause of biodiversity losses. It is one of the biggest drivers of future pandemics. Because of the deforestation and therefore facilitating the transit between wild animal, domestic animal, and humans, and emissions, which are going to be, with business as usual, we are looking at a sector that is going to be the highest emitter. And this sector can still rely on 800 billion of public support means the way we are financing food has to fundamentally change. Of this 800 billion that is in public support, 50% is in OECD countries and 50% is outside. So it's not about a rich country problem, it's everybody's problem. And as a result of this, only 35 cents are going to the farmer. And then we already know the impact in terms of emissions and so on and so forth. So and domestic financing is one of the biggest sources of financing in the food system. So we really need a very serious rethink. And I'll touch upon what could be some kinds of repurposing. That's one. I think the second is, and we did this for the UN Food Summit, we did a food finance architecture piece, is what also Professor Casio alluded to, is the private finance. Private spending in food, agriculture food, is north of $2 trillion. The World Benchmarking Alliance already looked at 250 top companies, food, feed, etc., and the results are very sobering. Less than 5% had climate disclosures. Less than 10% do living wages. So the private financing or the way agri-food systems are working also needs a big shift and really a very different kind of ESG standards. Third is consumer spending. So this is on the supply side. Consumer spending is about 12 to 15% of global GDP, which is 100 trillion, which means consumers are spending 12 to 15 trillion on food. And yet, we know there is a big issue on affordability. Luis talked about that 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. Okay, so those are the big things. But I want to also touch on a few other areas that we've really begun to focus on. First is the ODA to the food systems. It's about 10 billion a year. The recent report done by Donor Platform looked at the average size of investment, and it's less than 500,000. So one can just imagine the kind of inefficiencies, duplications, the cost of doing business. So the whole ODA cannot be so fragmented if you're looking for these kind of scale and impact. The other area that we've been looking a lot, we've been thinking a lot about, and we've gotten now as part of the G20 policy bucket, it's the G7 have picked it up as well in terms of, is the poverty lines. The poverty lines are right now in many countries are caloric sufficient. We have $1 trillion globally of income support or social protection programs. Could we not rethink the design of these social protection programs that become more nutrition sensitive so we really improve the affordability so people can pay for the kind of diet we are asking them to eat? Right now, they can't afford it. And yet there is this $1 trillion, and we need to bring the convergence. Another area that we've been now also looking into, and there has been, is debt for food swaps. Okay. Now, the debt for food, we say, if you recall as well, in the past, there was a bit of a concern because of the reversibility of policies when debt for environment kind of swaps were done. That over time, people were going back to old habits, and therefore, it brought about a lot of unease, particularly to the bilateral bilateral debt. We think that we have argued that debt for food, actually, there's a permanency argument, because it's the children who are most affected because of poor diets or malnutrition. And as a result, there's a permanent human capital loss. And therefore, really, if countries have a macro fiscal fiduciary systems in place, then could we put debt for food swaps on the table for these countries? And now there are three possible countries where there is IMF Article 4 kicks off, our macro fiscal fiduciary requirements kick off, and are highly indebted. So we are looking very optimistically and definitely would like to continue working on this. Another area, and you all know this very well, is climate finance. There's about 660 billion a year of climate finance from different sources. Agriculture and food is accessing about 25 billion, which is 4%. Our argument is if the emissions are 1/3, and we are looking for scale in terms of financing of the food systems, climate finance needs to go where the emissions are, right? But for that to happen, the negotiators need to negotiate. So I think you all will be very important in getting the negotiators back on table. Last COP in Dubai, COP28, there was a declaration that was signed by 159 countries the first time on food and climate. And the interesting part for us is there is such a big disconnect between what the heads of state of these 159 countries are saying and the negotiators. So it's clearly that's okay. Then one has heard about a huge adaptation gap, right? But even in climate finance, the breakdown between the mitigation finance and adaptation is 90-10. Should we not revisit these percentages in a way that adaptation finance also has a bigger share of climate finance? And finally, I want to touch on loss and damage, which is a fund that's coming alive now. And we've argued that agriculture and food needs to be at the table because between 2007 and 2022, about 25% of damage because of floods and droughts was to the sector. And during this period, livestock and agri-food system lost about $4 trillion. And so it's very important that when these negotiations are happening, that food and agriculture is well represented. And this kind of gives you a sense that when we say a food system is broken, but you all have seen lots of studies recently out in terms of the cost of building back this system. So it's good for people, it's good for planet, it's good for economies, is about 400 to 500 billion. Now, in some ways, it looks like a huge number, but it's just 0.5% of GDP, okay? I mean, global GDP. It's not impossible. And yet we have these sources of fund that are all working not in a concert. So we've really been trying to build a concert around food finance, and whatever opportunities we get, whether it's domestic financing or global financing or bilateral financing, to really get the energy behind in having a food system that serves us and the planet. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much. I think both of you have given us a bit of food for thought. I hope to explore a bit those dynamics when we have a bit of a discussion. So I'd like to turn the floor over to Jane to make your introductory remarks. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Louise. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming to this session, a very interesting session touching on agriculture and food. First of all, thank you so much, Louisa, and the Bretton Woods project for putting this together. What I'm going to talk about, just going to say a little bit. I know Professor talked about the whole issue about financialization of agriculture. I'm going to just say something about that. But I also want to bring out clearly the challenges facing the agriculture sector in my country, in Africa, and how the World Bank is intervening in those challenges, and see whether the World Bank priorities when it comes to agriculture is fit for purpose, and maybe later on what needs to be done. As Luis pointed out, financialization is one of those phenomena which has been there, but which has become really prevalent in today's economy. And financialization is the dominance of finance over the real economy and the restructuring of our economies to make them attractive to finance. In my country, we have changed a number of laws, a number of policies just to attract the private sector. Our investment laws to make sure that the investors come in, go where they want, and also we give them incentives and they take away their money. For me, this is part of financialization. And this is also what's happening to the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector is being restructured in such a way that it becomes attractive to the private sector, to the investors. So that surgery which is being done on our agriculture sector is having a lot of impact, negative impact on the agriculture sector and on the women. And the agriculture sector in Africa is already, and I agree with the previous speaker, that the agriculture system is broken. And within that context, this is where we see intensified financialization. We know the importance of agriculture. In Africa, agriculture is really, really important. It's the mainstay of our economies. It's a part of our livelihood. 70% of our people are employed in agriculture. But to show that the system is broken, it contributes just around 25% to GDP. And like the previous speakers have pointed out, there is a lot of hunger. People are hungry. There is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to agricultural production. And the reasons are both internal within Africa, because, for example, the support to agriculture is very low. Most governments are not providing more than 10% to their budget to agriculture sector. In fact, most countries it's around 4%, 3% of their budget. And you find that we liberalized, we opened up our economies, value-added agricultural products came in, we privatized, government left the agriculture sector to the private sector. And all these challenges have had a gendered impact. The women have suffered more. They have limited access to credit, limited access to land, limited access to information, limited access to inputs. So there is a problem when it comes to agriculture. So how is the bank addressing these challenges? As has been pointed out, the bank it has so many strategies. It has a gender strategy, which has just started, the 2024-2030. It has the food and agriculture strategy and programming. And in all those strategies, they recognize the fact that agriculture production, increasing agricultural production, is key to poverty eradication. And that promoting gender equality is also very important, and it's a pathway towards lasting poverty reduction, shared security, and prosperity. And I'm reading that, quoting it from one of the World Bank programs. However, when you look at the actual intervention, there is a contradiction there.
2 more minutes.
Two. Okay, there is a contradiction there because World Bank has been lending most of its loans on agriculture. They are promoting, for example, improved certified seeds. They are looking at increasing private sector participation in the provision of improved seeds, and also in the provision of chemical inputs. You find also, because they came up, one of the loans, they came up with the e-vouchers. So they used to give some money to the private sector to provide seeds, improved seeds, and also to provide chemical inputs to farmers, a sort of a subsidy. So you find that in Africa, most of the farmers use farm-saved seeds, but World Bank is promoting the improved seeds, not the farm-based seeds. So you find that the World Bank's intervention in the agriculture sector is promoting the interests of the private sector, and it's leading to corporate control over the agriculture sector at the expense of the small-scale producers. And as I will show later, this has had negative gender impacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Again, you've given us, I think, ample material to cover in our discussion. So, being conscious of time, I'll give the floor to Grace, who I hope is online. Grace, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise, and hello to everyone who's in the room. Thank you for joining the session. I'll briefly just go over the World Bank's push for finalization in agriculture and its gendered impact, and I'll be speaking specifically to the African context. So just to paint a brief picture of what the sector looks like from a gendered sense, we see that most of the societies are patriarchal, with women's control to resources such as land remaining limited, and that is due to the customary laws and that systemically disinherit women. And even in instances where we have national laws or provisions for equal land rights, they do not exist. So that means that land is basically in the control of men, and women cannot easily access it to practice agriculture. And even when we look at things like education and training on improved agriculture practices, it's largely an opportunity for men, because women are spending quite a lot of time doing unpaid care work and don't have the time to engage in such trainings. And despite the fact that women undertake the bulk of the work on farms, which is demonstrated by the fact that they contribute to 70% of food production on the continent, it is the men that control the cash proceeds from the sale of agricultural produce, and this continues to marginalize women. And in some instances, women, where they've been in position to take control of farms, they've been subject to abuse, such as gender-based violence, because they've probably not been able to consult their partners or the men on how they should be using the proceeds that have come out of the sale. So we see that even with the existing context, women continue to be marginalized in Uganda's agricultural sector. And when we look at the discussion around how the World Bank's advancement for financialization of agriculture continues to marginalize women, we see that the World Bank has continued to call for and invest in the commercialization of agriculture as a means to boost growth of the sector. And while this is not a bad thing entirely, we see that it becomes detrimental to the society if it is advanced through privatization and de-risking. And we see that often the World Bank's contribution to projects, for example, citing one which was started in 2008 in the wake of the global financial crisis, which was the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program. We see that some of these programs push a lot for increases in yields, and that at the end tends to have an agribusiness focus that is aimed at deepening entrepreneurialism. And this often benefits the big private companies as opposed to smallholder farmers, majority of whom are women. And as such, we've seen the rise of private companies taking over the production and supply of foods, even those that were previously staple foods, looking at cash crops. And this, of course, crowds out the smallholder farmers. And that then leads to a situation where we see the prioritization of corporate-dependent methodologies that have facilitated introduction of hybrid plants. And these often require high-cost synthetic fertilizers. They emphasize monocropping, all which are constantly detrimental to biodiversity and continue to worsen the ongoing climate crisis. And when we see the local seed varieties being wiped out, we see that there's definitely a decrease in food sovereignty, especially among farmer communities and women farmers. And when these foods disappear off our tables, it means that women will have to suffer the brunt of looking for food to feed their families, to feed their children, because it's one of the things that has been placed on them as a thing they have to do. And when we look at privatization of the agriculture sector, and we see that it comes with commodification of land for investment. And this means that populations, women, many of them have been evicted from their land that has been targeted for agricultural investment. And that means that they're left landless, especially with current land laws and resettlement schemes that are not sufficient to uphold their rights and ensure that they receive sufficient compensation for their land. So that means that as a result, women can also not access credit if they don't have collateral, of which in most instances land is fronted as the main collateral. And these challenges definitely leave women to play a role in the agriculture sector where they're merely looked at as laborers. And like Jen spoke earlier, with the investment laws that we have in place, it means that women then have low wages. They're subject to indecent work conditions, often with no protective gear, no pensions or social protection. And sometimes they're even subject to abuse, sexual abuse, in a bid to keep their jobs. And
Grace, can I ask you to wrap it up if you can? Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you.
Often failing to fulfill their sexual and reproductive health rights. And with the World Bank also supporting policies such as liberalization and deregulation, it means that there's unfair competition created, and that sort of leaves women out of the space to engage in gainful agriculture. And when we look at some of the strategies that have been put in place, one of them looking at the World Bank Gender Strategy, we see that it continues to perpetuate these challenges, as some of the efforts towards protecting the rights of women are still leaning towards protecting the rights of corporations. And we look at some of the things like the narratives of human capital and women's labor force participation as solutions. And these instead do not actually favor women, but instead continue to front the assumption that economic growth produces gender equality. And
sorry, Grace, can I ask you to wrap it up so we can leave a little bit of room for discussion?
Yes,
thanks. I apologize.
Just 1 minute. It's okay. It's just 1 minute. Looking at things to do with job creation that don't exactly address structural reforms, looking at how the bank continues to demand for privatization of basic services, all continue to affect women negatively. So it's important that the bank, while formulating such policies, takes into consideration a feminist lens that protects the rights of all people, especially the most marginalized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are very good presentations. As I said, I think we have ample room to maintain a discussion for a couple of days, although I'm not suggesting we try to do that today, because we need to eat dinner, have a couple of, celebrate the end of the day, etc. So I'd like to give the floor to Geeta to maybe respond to the comments that you have heard. In particular, when I was reading my introductory remarks, I heard you, which I presume was not in agreement with some of the statements made by the Special Rapporteur on the concentration of power in the agricultural sector, in the grain sector, in the seed sector. And, I'd like you to, and I noticed that you didn't, in your list of problematization of the food system, you didn't mention those aspects of corporate capture, nor did you mention the dynamics of price formation that are influenced by the use of agriculture as a speculative financial investment rather than, the production of food for consumption. So, if you could focus on that and focus also on the other comments made by Cassio, Jane, and Grace, that would be great. If you can take maybe 5 minutes or so, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I first want to compliment my panelists. I think they were amazing thought leaders and action leaders, and a lot of stuff we are hearing today, and some things we need to go back and talk to our colleagues about. But I want to touch on a couple of things, because I see Vanessa there. I was just with Agnes Kalibata talking about her leadership in agriculture for Africa. And I want to share a couple of things with you here, and then react also specifically to the extent I can to the points you've raised. Right now, we all know that the import bill for Africa right now is about 100 billion. But the part that took me aback a little bit is about 3/4 of it is for 4 commodities: rice, maize, wheat, and oilseeds. All 4 that the continent is very capable of producing. And I please excuse me when I say I think and this is what Agnes also made a very strong point, that with the global supply chain shaken up, this is a golden opportunity for Africa's agriculture. Therefore, I think we not just the World Bank, but everybody is really wanting to make this the breadbasket. Having said that, and you talked about productivity, that there's a lot of focus on the productivity side and the quality of seeds, and you alluded to fertilizer and so on. The hidden part of productivity is food loss and waste. And in Africa continent, it's about 40%. 3 countries, let me give you very concrete examples: Rwanda, Nigeria, and Kenya. Rwanda is 40% of food loss and waste, and it's almost 30% is in rice and maize. And this is about 12% of GDP for Rwanda that's lost. But it's also, I was just scribbling these points, 16% of GHG emissions that are coming out of the food loss and wasted. Kenya, and for Nigeria, I mean, it's 78 million tons. Okay, and so this is what needs to also be addressed, and this needs to be addressed. It's not a public sector problem. All farmers, farming is a private sector initiative. So what is making farmers waste food? Or, I mean, at the end of the day, a farmer is a net consumer, right? I mean, and yet this kind of loss numbers need a serious thing. And I think that's where also we started talking about that private sector does need to come in Africa. You wanted me to share a little bit in terms, but for private finance to come in, and we talked a lot about it, and we've been attempting to put financial de-risking platforms in place. Private sector doesn't just need financial de-risking, it also needs non-financial de-risking, which is the policy predictability, policy environments and a predictability that they come in and export bans are put overnight. I'm not saying it's happening, but it's been but more importantly.
Sorry, can I use my privilege as chair to,
yes.
Because, I'm not saying those things are unimportant. They're of course very important, but it's something that we know about. The bank talks about it. And given the title of this panel is on financialization of agriculture, and given that we have limited time, I'd really appreciate your help in addressing the issue of, that brought by the professor and others about do you recognize, does the bank recognize the impact of financialization in food systems? Is it concerned about it? What can it do about it? Because I stress again, it's been silent on that topic, which to us is quite concerning. So I'd appreciate you focusing on that specifically. Thanks.
Thank you. But I was coming to that last point. But the way before I get into finalization, the private sector development has to start with domestic private sector. And then you have small companies starting up, and then you're absolutely right, the big guys come and swoop up. But the ecosystem needs to be built with the smaller companies, and that's what we need to encourage in Africa. Okay, whether it's the seed side, whether it's the fertilizer side, whether it's about marketing, or whether whichever aspect of the private activities. Now we are silent on financialization of the corporate. And I think what we would love to do is, if there is a written, I know you were going to produce a paper on this, we would very much like to provide comments if it's helpful. I would like to engage my other colleagues as well from other parts of the institution, and be very happy to address some of the issues that are of concern to you and to other members.
Thank you very much. You'll be happy to know that we'll take you up on that invitation, I think, and we hope to have I have to say that there is a robust and expansive literature on financialization, broadly, and financialization of food systems, agriculture. So we'll be happy to engage on those discussions, and particularly in light of the bank's evolution roadmap on knowledge and the knowledge bank and reaching out to other points of view. I think we'll welcome that, and maybe we can pursue that. So I would like to give the floor to Jane to make some comments on general, and also particularly focus on what you've heard from Geeta and her analysis. Thanks. You have about 5 minutes as well. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much, Louise. I agree entirely with Geeta on the issues of food loss and wastage, that we need to do a lot here. But I don't think that's a private sector issue. I think we need to put back government, to be able to provide those services, because private sector is about making a profit. And I can give an example in Uganda when it comes to maize. Recently, we had a bumper harvest, a lot of maize, but the private sector buys what it can, what it wants, leaves the rest with the farmers. The farmers don't have any storage facilities. Government, because you told them privatize, leave it to the private sector. So the farmers are on their own with their maize, and the maize is rotting, you know. So we need, in all this, and financialization is what we see today is about putting the private sector in the driving seat, which is wrong, because the private sector is about making profit at all cost. So government should sit back in the driving seat and be able to direct the private sector. And going back to what Louise also said, that agriculture should be production for food, not for speculation. So we need to rethink the entire agriculture sector. And as Gita, you pointed out, the system is broken. But how do we put it together? And I think that's where we need to concentrate and agree. If we are putting it together, are we putting it together using the private sector as a driver or not? You know, so I think that's what we need to do, to rethink how we put back the agriculture sector.
Thank you very much. Maybe, Cassio, if I can ask you to come back in and maybe respond to Gita's request. Maybe you can give us a bit of some evidence around the impact of financialization, financial speculation, corporate capture on food prices and food insecurity, or speak a bit about the literature so we can get the discussion, a more profound discussion started. Thank you very much. Again, you have about 5 minutes, if you will. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Luis. The dynamics of territorial control in the agriculture frontier in Brazil has been changing a lot, both in terms of how land is taken and who drives these processes. Recently, the activities of corporate agriculture have become fundamentally shaped by transnational capital. This capital invests in the production of soybeans, maize, eucalyptus, and other crops with an intensive use of technology and machinery to replace labor, especially in the Chapadas area, which are high and flat lands, good for mechanization, but traditionally used as commons by local communities. From 2008 onwards, in this context of a multitude of crises, some companies have moved to invest in land as their core business. They are national financialized real estate companies, and they see land as a financial asset. Radar, SLC, Brasil Agro, Insolo, Vision, to name a few, have been created, and they result from the merger of large Brazilian agribusiness with transnational financial capital to invest exclusively in the business of land speculation. They acquire very cheap land, farms that have recently been created through land grabbing, expropriation, and direct deforestation of the Cerrado, which is our savannas. Agricultural land that was meant to be an autonomous financial investment became a questionable business. As a result, farmland prices have strongly risen in this period from 2008 onwards. Land has been one of the most important financial assets for investment in the last decade, especially in the Mato Piba frontier. Farmland prices have reached a 20-year record, making it impossible for common people to access it by the market. Again, the World Bank is there, backing land regularization in such a context of land dispute we have in Brazil through, for example, the program pilares do crescimento of the state of Piauí. Justified as a means of economic stabilization, the World Bank funds the state government project with interest to be paid. In order to pay for such funds contracted in foreign currency, the government has to be financed, what reinforces the need to producing soybeans and maize for exportation. Corporate farming is then supported, while local communities, which actually are those who really produce real food for the internal market, are dispossessed and the cerrados are destroyed. Not surprisingly, in recent years, while breaking annual records of agricultural commodity production for exportation, Brazil has returned to the UN's map of hunger. So the scale the World Bank targets for food security problems blurs those who actually produce food and favors corporate financial agriculture. Then to summarize it,
You have half a minute. Thanks.
The very concept of a highly productive agriculture integrated to or funded by the financial market that would address the problem of the food security in the world has on its concrete assumptions and practices the expropriation of those who protect the environment and within it produce real food, the local traditional communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, very, very interesting, important contribution to the discussion. So Grace, I'd like to hear your reactions to what's been said so far. Thanks. Have we lost Grace? Oh, there you are. Sorry. No, I'm sorry, Grace. You were gone for a minute. I thought we might have lost you, so I'm happy you're here. Thanks.
Okay, so I think it still goes back to ensuring that the World Bank, in its efforts to address issues to do with food security, address issues to do with food security, it's critical that it does empower states and not the private sector, because states would be able to take steps in terms of looking at the quality of the food that is being produced, but also ensuring that they protect the interests of their citizens, that they're not being wiped out by the existence of a big private sector. And also looking at some of the investments that World Bank should also be focusing a lot on looking at the smallholder farmers as well, and not only looking at yields or looking at increasing production, but also looking at the smallholder farmers and ensuring that they're able to expand and take forth and ensure that staple foods or African or local seeds are being protected, because at the end of the day, they're cheaper and production can keep going on with this. Definitely also stressing the fact that in this instance, the World Bank would also need to look into privatization of other basic services and goods that it has continued to fund, because they too tend to affect the agriculture sector. Looking at some of the negative impacts with proven cases from countries such as South Africa and Tanzania, where water has been privatized. So I would still maintain the need for them to take a holistic approach, when they are looking at addressing challenges within the agriculture sector. But the role of the state remains very critical in this whole process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've just, unfortunately, Geeta has told me that unfortunately she has to leave a bit earlier than the scheduled time. So I'll open up the floor to, I'd like to have had one more round, quick round, but I'm conscious that people may have questions from the floor. So why don't I open up the floor? If you could just introduce yourself, make your questions as brief as possible, that would be fantastic. Thank you. I guess I saw the first hand in the back.
Here. Hi. Hi, thanks for the panelists. I'm Rodolfo from Ibon International, based in Manila. Thanks to Geeta as well for reflecting on the panelists' reflections. I guess one thing that I wish to hear more from Geeta is something that, I think it's a concern that was also floated by the panelists, which is mainly about policy coherence. I mean, how do you reflect on the current priorities of the bank about food and climate, et cetera, food and agriculture and sustainability, etc. Given what the other colleagues have also mentioned, that at the same time that kind of priorities exist while the bank is at country level, might be lending and supporting policies that might be contrary to that kind of policy direction. And this is also a historical record. The bank has supported the Green Revolution, including in India, the Philippines, across South Africa, Colombia, Guatemala, etc., which has, of course, created plantation economies in many countries, which we know now is not the most climate friendly. The bank has also supported market-assisted land reform in the 90s, which has reconcentrated land to, promoted land reconsolidation. So, I mean, these realities vis-a-vis the current priorities of the bank, I wish to hear more reflections on this, which, I mean, my view is that it may have some...
Rodolfo, let me allow Geeta to answer the question, and then...
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I stop there.
I know that some chairs like to take multiple questions, but if you've seen me chair before, I'd rather do one at a time so things don't get missed along the way, which sometimes happens. So Geeta, I guess that question was aimed at you, so if you could address it, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I'm trying to see. Essentially, your question is, how is the bank ensuring priority on food and climate vis-a-vis our national programs?
Can I clarify? So essentially, how does the bank, based on its current reflections now on what should be done on food and agriculture, how do you consider that in reflection to what's also happening at the same time due to bank interventions, like everything else that the colleagues have mentioned, including its historical support for agricultural policies, which may be contrary. In retrospect, we realize is contrary now to climate imperatives.
I don't want to reflect. I like to move. I want to focus going forward. No, so because I think you're absolutely right that the Green Revolution focused a lot on the productivity side, and the productivity increases have come at a cost, no doubt about that. But let me also say, I know my chair doesn't like me to get off track, but it's a good moment to say something, which is the World Meteorological Organization has said that the world has never been the hottest. So we have, ever since they have started recording temperature, this is the hottest we've been. No, before that, this is the hottest we've been. And the way we know agriculture is about 9,000, 10,000 years old. So effectively today, agriculture is in uncharted territory, okay? And that's how I want to address that. We have been learning every day, and we are trying very much to be very, very conscious in terms of what we are supporting countries vis-a-vis sustainability. And remember, our mission statement is now on a livable planet. So sustainability and climate concerns is now core business. I'm very proud to say today, every dollar that's being invested in agriculture, which is about $5 billion to $6 billion a year, 50 cents is going towards climate is generating climate core benefits, both on adaptation and mitigation. So I think that's what I would like. And then a big agenda, whether it's on the soil health, whether it's on the carbon credits, carbon pricing, which is really about benefiting the smallholders, which are 3/4 women, which is why are we fighting for getting the price of carbon right, and that 21st century farming is not a single business enterprise anymore. So a farmer should have at least three revenue streams: from production, from renewables, and as an eco-service guardian, which is really about the soil health, sequestration of carbon. But for that to happen, we need to worry about the carbon pricing. So whereas I'll go back and look at, and I'm sure Luis will send me all the questions and exactly your concerns in some of our country programs, so I can answer it much more articulately rather than winking it here. But I also want to tell you that we really have a North Star here, which is the planet.
Just to add, if you've been following the discussions, even at the AD's roundtable today, there's quite a significant question around the methodology of the climate finance figures that the bank provides. So just to put that out there. Are there any other questions from the floor?
You must be doing something.
What do you mean? No, just...
No, but I take your point well.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
Be brief, please.
yes, I will, I promise. Robert Bain from the Bretton Woods Project. So, Geeta, how is the bank's gender strategy going to be operationalized in the bank's agricultural programming, particularly in the seed sector?
Today, we put out, I think, and Nico and Nugroha here, correct me, our food crisis response during the COVID period was about 45 billion. Am I right? Okay. Of which the beneficiary, almost half was women. The beneficiaries were women. So this is in the past 18 months, right? Our programs are 100% gender tagged, which means that these programs do not go forward. Our lending, not our analytical work. Our lending doesn't go forward unless and until it is not just gender sensitive, but really has a very positive, strong gender impact. And if there is, I would put the challenge out. If you have a program where you think we have not followed this, please share it with us. I will make sure all our colleagues know, but I can speak with quite confidence. The other is we also host a Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, which is essentially looking at not reacting crisis to crisis, but really having a systemic transformation. So there are robust agriculture and food systems and livelihoods associated. And 86% of our beneficiaries are women in those programs. So I feel quite confident that we are already implementing the gender strategy.
Can I use my privilege of chair to interrupt again and make a brief statement?
Yes.
And that's great. I think one of the concerns that we have, and this is a concern we express about the gender strategy more broadly, is that it's one thing to look at individual programs, but I think, for example, in DPFs, in the framing of the policy environment, for example, if you accept the fact as raised by Grace, Jane, and Cassio, that the policies of the bank have supported, the articulation of land as agricultural land as an investment rather than for productive purposes, etc. Those policies at the legislative level, etc., the facilitation of those dynamics have massive gendered impacts that are not reflected in the gender tagging, etc. So I think we're looking at a better articulation of what happens at the macro level in terms of the gendered impacts ex ante, rather than which we accept and we value the efforts to look at project-specific beneficiary breakdowns, etc. But I guess the dialogue has two different levels. With that, I'd like to open up the floor for a couple more questions, if I may. Sorry, then I'll go to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the session. Lots of learnings. My name is Wumi Oshalake, and I'm with the Global Shea Alliance. I'm going to ask a very narrow question. The shea sector is a key livelihood source for about 16 million African women. The goal is to create more visibility for them. However, we are experiencing a significant challenge, which is the loss of the parklands, about 8 million trees being lost on an annual basis. My question specifically is, how does the bank help, and what practical, engagements can we have to be able to address this significant issue? Women in rural Africa don't have a lot of economic opportunities, and I could guarantee you that 95% of income coming out of this activity is actually retained by women and spent. They do have agency over that. So we are looking to amplify the issue and looking to the bank to also support efforts on ground to restore parklands across. So my question is, how can we partner together and work on that together with you?
First, thank you for your initiative. We've heard a lot about it, and your co-conspirator also talks a lot about it as well. What I'll do is, after the event, I'll take your details from Luis, and I will connect you to our colleagues in the Africa region, because if I recall, there was going to be a regional program on shea because of exactly the points you raised, and I don't know what is the status of that, but there is opportunity there.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. I know you've been patiently waiting to ask your question.
Thank you for a very rich panel and an excellent discussion. My name is Samah Salman. I'm from Sudan, which is currently at the start of experiencing one of the most devastating famines in the world because of the war that is currently going on in Sudan. Before this war started, there was data that showed that if women had been able to participate to their full potential in the agricultural sector, that the number of Sudanese in currently IPC 4-5, emergency and catastrophe, food insecurity would have been reduced by about 30%, at least a third. Now, building on that, also before the war, there was increased number of projects with partnership, agricultural partnership, contract farming between the private sector and smallholder farmers. I think everybody knows what that contract farming is. You know, you contract smallholder farmers, you give them the seeds, all the inputs, the financing, and you guarantee them a market and a price, a fair price for their products. I want to just hear from the panel, what is your assessment of contract farming? Obviously, there's not enough women involvement. If the percentage of women were to increase, do you think it would be a viable way of moving forward as a partnership between private sector and women smallholder farmers, or do you think it is flawed? Thank you.
Well, as you have to leave relatively soon, would you like to take the first this question first, and then we can have also Grace and Jane's input as well as Casio's. Thanks.
I think to have women involved in economic activity is a must. Now, whether it's contract farming or something else, maybe my panelists are in a better position to respond to that. But if a program works and benefits accrue, I think we should do more of it. That would be my quick 2 cents. I want to also apologize. I meant to stay for the full, but I have to leave 10 minutes earlier. So, but thank you, and please send any of your queries, and we will make sure we respond point by point.
As I was saying, I hope that this is a beginning of a discussion, and maybe we can have compile some additional information, reports, academic literature, and then we can have revisit the discussion in greater depth in a dedicated session somewhere. So we'd really be looking forward to that.
Oh, with pleasure.
I'd like to ensure that next time we meet, you're better able to respond to these concrete methodological and substantive questions we have on financialization specifically. So, great, thanks.
I look forward to first reading what you've written and then reacting to it.
No, of course, I understand that, yeah. Jane, would you like to answer the question of contract farming and the results for women?
I conclude, I think.
Sure, you can. You can conclude as well after. Yeah, we still have a bit of time for a couple more questions.
Okay. Okay. The issue of contract farming, and I think I agree with Gita. Whether you do contract farming or not, I think that the whole issue here when it comes to agriculture is to overhaul the entire system, you know, because they, you know, like we have been saying, the entire system is broken. And how do we overhaul it holistically? It's about structural transformation. In Africa, we talk about structural transformation of our economies. And agriculture is the basis, the bedrock of that structural transformation. So it's important really to ensure that we ensure increased production and productivity, industrialization, and trade in value-added commodities. The chain has to be clear, backward and forward linkages. And maybe we need to look at the kind of policies that can support that, you know, and it has to be a range of policies. The trade policies have to be to align to that vision. The investment policies, climate change policies, addressing the debt issue. So it's a combination of a number of issues, not looking at one area, agriculture, contract farming. At the end of the day, if we pick and choose some little bits of agriculture, we are going to have a problem. And I think what's also important is we need to agree on the role of the World Bank. You know, the World Bank doesn't have to be everywhere in contract farming, in seed, in, you know. So we need to renegotiate the role of the state, the role of World Bank, and the role of the private sector. What role are we assigning to all those entities given to what we want to achieve? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if, Grace, you have any thoughts on contract farming specifically, anything to add?
I think for me, contract farming would not exactly solve the problem, because at the end of the day, we see that it still leaves corporations or companies with an upper hand and still subjects farmers to having their prices set by the market forces of demand and supply. So contract farming, without the government stepping in to take its role and regulate the agriculture sector, would still not solve the problems at hand. Thank you.
Thanks. Cassio, do you have anything to add from your point of view?
Well, I'm in total agreement with Grace here in Brazil, whether in the dairy production, whether in the orange production, contract farmers are squeezed and subordinated to big companies, big corporate production. So I don't think it's a really alternative to the problems.
Thanks. And actually, Cassio, I have a question for you. We still have our colleagues from the World Bank here, from the agricultural team that were able to stay. I would appreciate your reflections on, you know, for example, I know that there's a lot of literature produced on the effects of financialization and agriculture, etc. Where do you see the gap between, you know, what it seems to be a lack of familiarity by the World Bank, people in charge of food systems and nutrition, and the existing literature on this topic? Do you see that as, you know, what do you think academia could do to increase to highlight this issue? Have you had discussions with the World Bank office in Brazil about this topic? I mean, do you have any reflections?
Well, I have had some discussion on the World Bank's 2011 report, Rising Global Interest in Farmland, which was very criticized in the academia as a whole, because it had somehow seen as beneficial for the world to address the food problem if corporate business took place in the land market. And that was really a factor that increased the demand for land as a financial asset from 2011 onwards, which is the same period I studied as the period in which land as a financial asset had its peak in prices. Well, then I don't have further conversations with the bureau here of the World Bank, and I do research in a more broadly way. But as I was trying to target here in my presentation, we have a continuous way of addressing of the World Bank since the 1990s program, which was called the Land Notes, so Cédulas da Terra, which have a clear direction in regularization of land titles in very dispute contexts. So the most I think I can say that the consequences of such programs as the Land Notes and the Pilares do Crescimento, which are funded by the World Bank, is that they give land titles mostly to big farms that land grab land from local communities.
Thank you very much. We have about 5 minutes left. I don't know if there are any other questions from the floor. If not, I don't know if, Jane, would you like to make any closing remarks? Or
Thank you so much, Luis. My closing remarks, when we are looking at the way forward, for me, I was really surprised by Professor Cassio's presentation. The way the World Bank, the policies are one size fit all, For example, the issue of the land as a financial asset, and this has been happening in Africa. We had a lot of communal land, and the World Bank had, this big project where people are given land titles, and they are men, of course, not women. So communal land is turned into individual land, and this has had an impact on what Professor Cassio has really shared, and this is what is also happening in Africa. So I think it's important to engage more, have these conversations at national level instead of having, coming here. We need to engage the World Bank, back home. For me, I think that's really important. I don't know how we are going to do that, but I think it's really, really important because we haven't had such conversations at the national level. Thank you.
thank you very much. Grace, any closing remarks or any closing thoughts on your side?
I think for me, what stands out from this session and what would then amount to my closing remarks is that financialization of the agriculture sector is not the solution to food sovereignty, be it in Africa or any other continent across the globe. Financialization is not the solution. The role of the state remains very critical, and women being the vulnerable or marginalized part of the population need to actively participate in the formulation of some of these policies, especially at the country level. And a holistic feminist approach is definitely critical to see that we advance agricultural practices and policies that will then contribute to achieving food sovereignty. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And Cassio, any final thoughts?
Sorry. I'd like to thank the panelists. It was good to know Grace and the other Jane and other conversation we have here. And thank again, Luis, for the invitation.
Thanks. And then, so if I may take the liberty, I guess I'd like to make one closing remark, which, you know, it's interesting. I think, as I mentioned before, it's great that the bank is focused on reiterate itself as a knowledge bank, but with much more focus on input from the Global South. Because I have to say, and this is, I'm not saying this as a criticism, I'm just saying that I was legitimately surprised by the lack of awareness of the topic of financialization, agriculture, etc., among, you know, an institution that is, you know, the global knowledge hub in development issues, because there is an extensive literature out there on financialization, broadly speaking, but also financialization of agriculture. You know, as we saw, the transition of land from communal productive land for livelihoods and consumption of food domestically into investment vehicles for speculation is quite a significant change in global patterns, right? And that have a massive impact on agriculture. So I'm just reiterating that we really do look forward to continuing the discussion. We hope that in this openness of the knowledge bank as a more expansive and engagement with the broader sector, we welcome that and we hope to continue the discussion. So thanks again for everyone to spend the afternoon with us. Enjoy the rest of the day and evening. Thank you very much.